Alex Answer here. It is February 11th in the year 2019. Welcome. I have a snowstorm outside, and of course in Portland, we're seeing empty store shelves. I'm here in Colorado. We're about to get that same storm in about 2 days. So we're about to get another foot of snow. So again, it is my honor to come to you using the generator and solar power when available. This is going to be, again, a longer free flow in which I'm going to aim to get into the things that I intended to talk about, and there's going to be the extra things that come in. The full show will be for supporters at Patreon. You can join for as little as $1 a month. Most of you can't afford that. It's preferred that you at least put in $5 to $10 a month or more if you can. There's definitely a lot of suppression taking place with YouTube, and I wonder if this is our last year. There's concerns that I have, and let's just kind of start there. Our main topic will be, however, why there is such a strong interest in 80s music, 80s nostalgia, including the 70s, but in particular the 80s, in particular the mid-80s. And so I'm going to talk about how, for a person like me that's an independent thinker, there are many, many times, even though I seem so separate from society and my ideas and whatnot, are we really so separate? There's ways in which I myself can overcome the illusions of separation. And see, even if I label myself such an outside-the-box thinker, there are still certain things on a collective level that biologically we're going to tap into. So I kind of want to touch upon this, then come back and cover some other things. But there's something about the 1980s and the energy. And I'm looking at this intuitively, not just from a VH1, where are they now type of documentary, but if you've taken the time to read my ebook and you've come across my past videos, commentary on the solar flare influence over human consciousness, I mean, you got to give it to me. I'll take it to a level to where that famous Indian guru that the whole world is watching doesn't take it. That's not to take away from some positive things that he may be speaking about. But I've been talking about the fads and describing to you in that ebook and in past videos periods in which, there's like the exercise pants, jazzercise, there was Desert Storm. There was something like the solar cycle 23 and the peak. And if you've become aware of the connections between wars and peaks in solar activity, you might also become aware of the increase in earthquakes, other earth changes, but also an increase in human behavior, excitability. The Human Excitability Index, to use the specific term that Alexander Chavinsky of Russia, he came out with this chart, 2,500 years of sunspot counts that he got from the Chinese, and he tracked the periods in which there was wars and peace, right? Solar cycles and war and peace, and the cycles of war and peace. That's a deep level of taking a look at it. Just looking at crops and things of that nature, that's one thing. But when you start to look at these periods of civil unrest and periods also in which people are getting along more, you can kind of see the highs and the lows. So when I personally, with this knowledge, look at the 1980s and the nostalgia surrounding it and the new music that is being made, that is being referred to as 80s, but it's not 80s, they're making it now. So think cyberpunk, space mix, specifically synthwave. You can type in best of synthwave, get an idea. You can watch some previous videos where I've incorporated some synthwave. And then I kind of leaned back in shock recently, seeing like an article from the Wall Street Journal saying that synthwave is going mainstream. Also watching a couple other new YouTubers talking about the 80s and healing and the 1980s, and I've never heard other people also talk about that. And so whether it's the 80s or things that include cinema, with just like light music in the background, and I'll just get right to it, it's like we're picking up also on the energy that was going on at the time of that recording. And so there's a reason why, and I showed some clips from Hunter the TV show, not like a big fan of the police state, but there's elements of the hero archetype, obviously so, where it's obviously an expression of a good guy cop that is doing the right thing. And we do live in a fallen world of demons, so there are crimes that are going to be committed unless we're in a, new age collective shift and, like floating around like fairies, which we're not, right? We're still in this world of duality. So there's a reason why people are going to request the services of protection. Now, we have a very mismanaged system. The 1980s. The 1980s had a lot of pop culture that got people going, and I can recognize through the Cops TV show and other things elements of TV pop culture that were used to build support for the federalization of the local police, whether we like that or not, right? So we can look at elements of cinema, and we can look at elements of pop culture, specifically like the Cops TV show, and kind of maybe some people can laugh at, maybe their first memories of watching that, or the WWF, as it was referred to in the past. Hulk Hogan versus the Ultimate Warrior. Hulk Hogan versus Randy Savage over Elizabeth in the famous Elizabeth Meltdown match, which I revisited about a year ago. It's like I've revisited so many elements of my childhood and have revisited the 1980s, watched things from the 80s from my childhood that I ever watched as a child. And as I watch these things, like there is a part of me that's taken back. There's that, the chorus from one of the Rocky songs off the soundtrack. Take you back, do 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 do, take you back, no 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 no, take you back, do 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 do, and there, obviously there it was, in a Rocky early 1980s movie, the idea of take you back, and that's exactly what these songs do. Synthwave, which is new, kind of captures the 80s spirit with the synthesizer. So the type of music, even though it's electronic, it's a lot different than modern electronica, house. There's some people that are into like dark goth, industrial, things that basically sound demonic. There's elements of hip hop, heavy metal, and other things. I think, listen, I'm all about someone's right to do whatever they want to do, I guess. But there are consequences for your actions spiritually, regardless of free speech. Is there something to the quote unquote satanic panic of the 1980s? And I think that the answer to that question is yes. It's been made a joke, kind of like Reefer Madness, because some people may have taken it too far. But what kind of society have we seen come out of the 1980s? Now get real. I mean, get real with me. What type of real society have we seen from the 1980s? So again, this is also another reason why I think that people want to go back. Take you back. Do. There's a number of different reasons, and I should, continue to describe those reasons. There was a period of innocence that still remained. America wasn't fully drugged out yet, and each one of these could be a 1-hour talk, but I'm going to keep going. Less hormones in the food, but the hormones in the food were fairly fresh, and so think anabolic steroids. They could be a period in which a species is introduced to something new that boosts it up, or an individual. But if they continue that way of life, it can tear them up in the long run. You could say that our society has been on steroids to a certain degree with regards to elements of the food. And so there could be a period in which people are extra sexual, maybe romantic, developing larger breasts. And maybe there will be an element of that population that will be at that level. But down the line, their genetics could be degraded as a result. Just to bring you up to speed, I want to keep modern politics out of this. Hypocrisy has become like the next religion next to anti-themism in the modern America. A note to future generations. There'll be future videos where I'm specifically speaking to future generations that will get it more than my current audience, no offense intended, but we all know what time it is. And we're in the time of the fallen world. And so keep these things in mind as you're exposed to ideas that you haven't heard before. Going back to the 1980s, there was a sense of people being hotter, both men and women. It was the bodybuilder phase with regards to men and action films. So films were still fairly new. You got to think in terms of beyond your lifetime and not think of 60 years as a long time. Think beyond your lifetime and think in terms of the lifetime of the species. And when you look at things from not your narcissistic view of your life and your pain and your trauma, but you look at it from the perspective of the species, then you can see how there was something about the post-1940s World War II bombing of Japan that was its own fertilizer on America. As veterans of that time were given things that veterans of today's era were not given. And we were still dealing with expansion, buy this land low in these areas, populate, have children, consume. We have all this food now. It was early GMO, monoculture, all the food you can eat, the standard industrial family. Again, we have documentaries about this. The industrial family. Let me get my kitty cat. And my mood has gone up since the kitty cat arrived. I rescued the kitty cat. The kitty cat's birthday. Maybe we should have a birthday party for the kitty cat around July of 2019. I think it was back in August. It was during that channel, believe it or not, I spent $100 for the cat, not getting its rabies shots, but it had its basic shots as required and the chipping. But it was during that period in which my channel was demonetized. And just so you guys know, like my income is about $100 a month from the AdSense, which is horrible. There does seem to be something potentially about some of the content that I've talked about over the years. My suspicions lie in the direction of the warnings I've given you about foreign governments marching on America's future. So, and we'll get into another reason why 80s nostalgia is rising in popularity. Women are looking back on a subconscious level to the period of the true masculine hero, right? Whether that be almost like a Schwarzenegger or a Stallone or something. So you can see synthwave that's rising in popularity with like these old school action hero types. The modern ones have become very fake, just like the fake titties of today's day and age. So there's something about, even if they played their games, and those men and women of the 1980s were not angels, but they had more of a prana, of a chi, of a ki glow to their sexuality, to their violence, to their music. There was something that had a little bit more class to it that seemed organic. And what is that on a deeper root level? Those people had class. Those people don't have class. That's not that like everybody had class back then, but the idea of class, of etiquette, of basic manners, elements of our humanity. And that's what it is. People want to go back to a time and watch movies in which people were showing the more beautiful side of themselves, including, and this is now we're getting key, now we're getting Sword of the Stone-ish, including how they conduct themselves in relationships. I mean, we're a long way from when Harry met Sally. There's also things that are referred to as 80s that are a part of the 90s genre. Keep that in mind. We're now in a dumbed down state of mind now to where people's measuring is off. 2 + 2 = 5.7. Yeah. They're going to argue about a border wall while agreeing to have never-ending wars overseas. We're in a world of things being gray and confusing. Stay out of the political madness. Subscribe to this channel if you're new, but politics will not be the main focus of this. But hey, let's say something with regards to the 80s. In the 80s, there was something, it wasn't Donald Trump, it was Reagan, and Reagan scared some people, but it wasn't like now. But there was this sense of being on the verge of war with Russia. And we can see the, come on, kitty, come here. We could see the rage against the machine type archetype rise. I even remember, again, it was Southeast 22nd, between 22nd and 23rd, that my dad had an apartment in Portland. And I would visit my weekend dad from my grandfather's home, my grandmother's home in Aurora, Oregon, the 40 acres right up on 27055 Airport Road, right up from that hill, coming up from downtown. That's right on 99E. My grandpa, by the way, had a plane. He would take me as a child in a plane. So it's like, well, when I watch movies, I wouldn't say that my grandfather was rich, like a tycoon type. I didn't grow up like Richie Rich. Grew up in poverty, but we grew up in safety in the country. I had a room, and there's certain elements of urban blight that I didn't see when I was a kid. But I grew up fast after 13 and got a chance to see elements of the United States. For me personally, I'm not telling my life story, but for me personally, going back to the 80s is a period of living stability. Don't really want to speak ill of my parents per se, but let's just be frank. There are positive memories, and you want to go out and you want to come back in, and you want to go out and come back in. I'm saying to the kitty. But there was something that was way more positive between myself and my parents in the 1980s. There was what seemed to be a wave of darkness. I saw emotional disturbances in a lot of people after the 90s. Let's just be frank. By the 2000s, I was going through my own drug abuse. And as I went through my own recovery, I was coming to deep levels of epiphany regarding not only recovery, but regarding the cycles of abuse. And the cycles of abuse, not to make this all about the solar cycles, for those of you that are only able to handle one dimension of what I'm discussing, which is just the energetics of 80s nostalgia, I'm here to tell you that there's an energy coming from the sun and those solar peaks that's moving us forward in the evolutionary cycles forward. Are you listening, Kitty? Because this is the key. And I was born in 1980, and there seems to be a type of generational, almost soul bond. I think that we're all connected, but there's something about people of certain generations and years. One of the things that I've experienced, like there could be people drawn to my work that were born between 79 and 81, but also other people that may, for example, have been born in 74, or people born on specific dates. And I'm noticing a pattern with that. I also notice patterns with names of people, and whether it's a positive or a negative experience, almost like there's something to that. So I haven't had the best experiences with, other Ryans or other Alexes or things of that nature. Kind of up and down with Davids. And so there's just something to numbers, names, places, synchronicities. And so in the 1980s, a lot of people went through traumatic things. There was something about, and various people have, and this is kind of weird, there are various people that have memories of weird things happening in kindergarten, preschool, and early periods in life. My only weird memory regarding that was some sort of a strange memory of us being served some sort of green spinach or green goo that set off my alarm bells. And I don't discount a child's paranoia. So I treat some of those theories with a grain of salt because the world is already really strange. I mean, the very fact that someone's being sent to kindergarten and they're interacting with other kids, they're going to have different spiritual influences. And what I mean by that is, and let's talk about that. Another reason why people want to go back to the 80s, because they're going to get more than your average video on nostalgia. So I talk about spiritual warfare on this channel, and we on one level are evolving as we go through these solar epochs, and we get this new download of light, but that which gives us life also gives life to that which feeds on us, or the spiritual parasites, which are in other forms. Solar powered spiritual parasites that feed on human emotion and energy. I've been talking about this for years. And so there are a number of different things I can say on this. Want to be brief, but we go through certain periods. Right now I'm thinking about 85, 86, 87. And some people call that the, before 2012, there was 1987. Harmonic convergence period. I do strongly detect a shift in energy between the period of 85 and 87. And I think that world events sharply show that. And so when someone's going back in their mind to the 80s, they're going back to a period before it happened. And the it happening can be perceived in a duality fashion as both good and bad, the post-87 reality, and what led up to 2012. We gave them kind of place 9/11 and that traumatic event kind of in the middle, but identify how 9/11 came during a high energy period, a staged event, the event that got us in these wars. But and now they're cracking down on even discussing that in a real context on YouTube. So I'm being brief. That's the modern Orwellian reality that we're in. There's even a little bit of nostalgia, but very small. Going back to 2002 for myself, when it was like almost very free and welcoming for someone to be very much questioning what the hell is going on over there. Now people are numb to it. You've heard this before. There are things going on now that would greatly upset the people in the past. And also, when we talk about the past, it's not all evil. We have like families that weren't entirely broken up yet. We had like living grandmothers and grandfathers that weren't entirely bankrupted yet. A lot of people were by their children, and I'm just being fair. I'm not trying to be hurtful, right? But we are, again, let's go back to something I said earlier. A lot of our grandparents that were alive during the Great Depression, World War II, or World War II even more so, grew up during a period in which they inherited a lot of surplus from the government during that period in which it was still in a period in which they wanted to build up the population for future conflicts. Now, that's not a level of understanding that some people have, and some people are going to hit the back button or dislike, but that's not my problem. It's important that people take an honest look at our American history from the 1940s, the 50s, and 60s, and realize that Americans really were given the world between the 40s and the 80s and 90s. And so let's go back to the 80s. The 80s were like the cutoff point, I think, for the family, for romantic hot songs. Let's get it on. And they still got it, but it's like bad music. And also that period brought it may have been somewhat of a hoax, the way they presented AIDS, because they surely, in today's day and age, neither do you, we don't see these big, hey, stop, stop, stop. You know, it's like some of us have actually had unprotected sex and we shouldn't have, and we still didn't get AIDS. And yet we grew up in a world we were told there was this great AIDS, HIV threat. I remember my uncle Bruce. I have some positive memories of him and some not so positive. But you know, through my uncle Bruce and Phil, I've gotten a chance to see the lower nature that's within that side of my genetics. And it really goes contrary to a lot of the white supremacy ideology that's being presented in today's day and age. And I will get into that deeper in a book and or other podcasts. But through the 80s and 90s, leading to 2000s, I became the man that you're seeing now. So on another literal level, like I can go back and listen to certain songs. But earlier I downloaded There's Something Going On. And I forget the name of that artist, starts with a K. But there's something about, I love Stevie Nicks. I love Journey. I love Tangerine Dream. I love some of the old school Pink Floyd. After the Syd Barrett, so kind of like within that zone, Pink Floyd, The Wall. So there's literally, I associate like certain years of movies, music, professional wrestling I do not watch, but within the box of that, their golden years can clearly be calibrated and defined between the 1985 and 1991 period. Elements of pop culture can clearly be defined between the 84-85 period. We can see periods of highs and lows, but there's some sort of a blast off energy. And I still remember to this day, you know, hearing in the background of the library, holding my mother's hand in Seattle, Washington, where we lived at Arthur's house. There was something synchronistic about Arthur. Certainly, I feel like there's something Arthurian in the Welch bloodline from my grandmother, her mother. And I think that a lot of the more spiritual stuff on that line comes from that place, with the more Norse mythology side coming from the grandfather, the mother of my father, with the stuff from the East on my father's side going also in different directions. I think that I was born in this body with this unique combination of genetics at the proper point in the timeline. So I think I'm a solar baby. I think that I came in with a certain level of knowledge with the sun. That doesn't mean that I just got here. But the sun and its cycles seems to be a period in which there's more births and more deaths, but something to the humans that are born during the solar peaks. That's something that I've suspected. That's something that I have personally suspected. But there's something about those individuals that are born during those solar peaks. So you've been exposed, for example, so far to the idea of Chinese astrology. And now every 12 years it changes. And I had a good friend that was also a monkey. He had a different sign with regards to Western astrology. He was a Gemini, so the Gemini monkey, while I was a Pisces, or I'm a Pisces monkey. But what I'm saying to you is, and all those sciences have to deal with solar radiation and its effect on human psychology at birth.
but so does this from another level. So there's a combination of different factors. It's really beyond what we can really detect really closely. And there's plenty of people that are deep into astrology that somehow seem clueless about the real world as it is. They start trailing off into telling people they're going to meet a new lover, and with their readings that people do. There's a lot of people that engage in readings that don't seem to understand certain physics of destiny or certain things being the way that they are for a reason. And I think that there's danger in giving false, positive, or negative predictions about things unless one is really, really confident in it. And one should use a little bit of discretion when engaging in such. And we're all going to have our unique paths. And so giving like all people like the same reading from the same card doesn't make any sense to me. People on a one-on-one level, though, having their own karmic return, their own type of now that I understand. The synchronicity, for example, of opening up a book like a tarot deck and then reading one specific passage, the monkey god. As pious Buddhists, Tibetans believe that their original ancestors were none other than the holy Bodhisattva. Now I'm thinking Steely Dan, in the guise of a monkey, and the goddess Gorilla Matar in the form of a rock. These patron deities of Tibet have watched over their descendants ever since. The Tibetans account for a variety of personality types among them by claiming that the first 6 monkey children included one representative from each of the 6 realms known to Buddhist cosmology. I think that information come to us randomly, just like tarot cards. I just don't think that we're all on the same page. But on a collective level, we are here, and I do think that we could be a part of, again, a larger collective consciousness. I don't subscribe to all of the theories that are proposed that include the word collective consciousness. Most of them I don't. I think that most of the time when you hear that, people are promising a collective shift in consciousness that will fix our problems. Instead, I talk about a collective consciousness, kind of like the way that Carl Jung would, but different with an Alex Ansary style. And I'm showing you that I'm attempting to, that the collective consciousness is contaminated. And I would agree with people that would look at our like totality. The mass consciousness is in the gutter right now. And as someone that's had his fair share of sexual relations with the opposite sex and decent, semi-brotherly bro, yo, you're my bro with men over the years, right now there's basically nobody in my corner with maybe a few hundred, and in some cases less than that. I'm experiencing major challenges right now. And I'm not here to whine and now shift the focus of the video. I actually have to come up with the deeper levels of prana and strength, physical and mind, body, and spirit to continue. There's periods like last week for those of us on the spiritual path, we feel like we're getting our ass kicked. And some of us, which kind of had that visionary element, we may really start to feel the heat when we're speaking truth. I feel that when I speak about that guy down in Austin. I feel that even more so when I speak about the guy in Portland that's playing the Pied Piper, acting like they're patriots when they're really bussing in, so-called patriots, projecting, accusing the Portlanders of, well, in many cases, what they are guilty of. And being that I was born there, and that Portland, I said, was a microcosm for a number of different things. I said that I felt that Portland would be invaded. You can even say that what's happening now is a slow motion invasion or occupy to make way for future invasions. It's like a pinch myself moment seeing things that I've predicted not only manifest, but it's also heartbreaking seeing some people act like they're waking up to white supremacy, but they won't talk about anti-themism. If they can't talk about anti-themism, then they can't conquer the things that they think that they are going to set out, lift their sail, and conquer this construct. Unless you understand what's really taking place, unless one can acknowledge the genocide taking place in Afghanistan, they're not presenting concrete arguments against that system. And so if someone wants to defeat that system, one must overcome the straw man argument. One
must overcome the straw man argument. Now, again, I'm going to tell you the name of Nellie Fuller Jr. We're going to play a clip from him at some point. Let me see if I can go ahead and, just bring it up for you now. And as a white person, which most of you are, you can listen to what he's saying, and you can replace the word in some cases with white supremacy as the establishment. You can listen to the actual energetics of what Nellie Fuller Jr. is saying and go, I get it. And you can go beyond the illusions of separation, that the things that he's talking about are just relating to him or African Americans. And there are not other speakers that I've come across, but there are other good speakers that are Black or African American. But he is at another level. And as I suspected, he has a spiritual side to him. He's trying to help people overcome this type of a system. And he is not interested in giving props to even his own people for, quote unquote, what they will call Black culture. He's saying, wait a minute, you ain't free yet. Wait a minute. Our people are still hurting themselves. Wait a minute. Don't you be propping yourself. We still got to deal with this situation. And he's not calling for violence. There are not people at his level, right, that I have come across, and I haven't met people that are at my level, and we're not at the same level. What we are is at a level in which no man or woman matches us in a world of billions of people. We are taking specific topics that are very popular, and we're not just copy pasting other people's talking points. We're speaking free flow from a spiritual perspective with an interest in seeing the world liberated from this enslavement. I will take it another step further. I talk about the matrix. I talk about us being powerful souls beyond our genetics. We could be thrust into genetics, maybe even as a curse or punishment for things we did to people of certain genetics or bloodlines. Who knows? Who knows what a past Alexandria soul did to those people of the Middle East to be born half as one of them during a time, mind you, in which the greatest disdain of the mainstream alt-righter is a combination of the East and the West. That woke me up and helped me understand why I am totally alone and why my message will only reach several hundred people at best. And I'm at that same level that I was at 6 or 7 years ago, with very little growth and no real friends in my corner. Just one, who lives several states away. Mentioned her a few times, a platonic friend, more like a family member than my own blood. What I see others also extend that same level of friendship and camaraderie, although I want to thank the very few emails that have come in the last month. I think one from Tunisia. I think someone wrote from Poland a few months ago. I think another lady said hello from Italy. Notice how it has to require being outside the United States to be somewhat friendly. There's something taking place, not to take away from those very incredibly few of you within the borders of the United States that have said hello, or that you appreciate the content, or that you get it, or that you get it over time and are not just one of those Johnny come lately, Lisa come lately individuals that act like you care about me, act like you care about my content, and then you fly away like a birdie forever, right? When I start getting real with the truth about relationships and the fallen world. And I've seen like women that weren't even or aren't even like viewers now or commenters now act like they got it a year ago or 2 years ago. And what I'm saying to you now, let's get back to the main theme. I'll play a clip from Nellie Fuller Jr. another time, because I want to stay on point. In the pre-social media age, it would be much more appreciated for a woman to meet a guy like me and be able to talk about real things. Now you just hit a button, and it's like pornography for the woman. It is. So you get that knowledge, you get that download, but you don't actually have to be his friend. You can just literally, in the way that a man would watch pornography, and women, people can watch people and get their type of spiritual epiphany. They can literally, in a way, not to say that's you, but there are people that are straight up energy vampires.
that are on the internet that are feeding on the life force of others without realizing what they're doing. And this can even happen as a host. And there are some people that are able to effectively do it. It's not a path that someone should ever allow themselves to go down. That is why I pull back from the comment section so I can lower those elements of that within myself that were previously more dominant. For example, I was very much in pain when I would be on Facebook and I would write these long articles about my life and my life story, and very few people would engage with it. Where I would see only those that I would identify to being non-whites or minorities liking it after a day. Like I might recognize a few Middle Eastern names, and I'd be like, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. I have hundreds of thousands of, like tons of contacts. Are you guys saying that somehow you feel triggered because I'm sharing part of my story? Okay, that is enough to alienate me entirely from the platform. And that's another reason why I'm thinking that maybe I should give up YouTube in the next year, because the empathy from the audience when I talk about my life story doesn't seem to feel like it's there at all in any way. It actually feels like it was there in the past. And there's something about 2019 and where we're going to where empathy is disappearing. The nurturing, loving female, either from the audience or the real world, doesn't exist. Although, again, I want to thank those platonic friends that I've had that have been there like sisters, because I don't really have sisters or brothers. I don't really have a connection with family. So those people that have been man and woman enough to be a friend to Alex have been so few and far in between. Um, and the greater truth is that all those women that I had sexual intercourse with in the past, none of them are friends today. What they saw in me was strictly physical and incredibly carnal and lustful when it did occur. And all of it was seemed to be concentrated, with a few exceptions, during that period in which I was receiving or reaching the most people on Access TV. So in their mind, I was almost playing the role of a celebrity, even though that's not a title that I ever gravitated to. There was a perception of who I was and who I had the potential to be, including a guy that had the potential to go on big media, maybe make some money one day. So there were women that were kind of in the periphery, watching closely to see if I was about to make a leap. And if I was about to make a leap, like I could think back to when I had that store on Gleason, I think I probably had sex with 6 women, which was just my record in what, probably a month period or a few months period. Probably over the course of a few months, 6 to 7 different women. What was the defining factor that was unique about this lowly man's life? I was managing a survival store, and I lived in the back. And that bed in the back saw a lot of action. And that mucho action, I haven't really given it much detail yet. There's even some things, that are like, whoa, that's a bit nasty. No. I actually had a couple girls leave the store because they were pissed at me for not going along with their kink game. One girl wanted to be slapped around and basically beat up. And I was like, whoa, this is a setup. They're trying to set me up. This is some freaky stuff. And yeah, they came back in the store with me after being in that bar, that Chinese restaurant, I think on 73rd or 74th in Gleason, because at that time we were on 72nd in Gleason in Northeast Portland. It's not a good area. But when I think about those times, though, where the opposite sex acted interested, it was when it seemed like I had more to vampire off of. There was obviously also more fellatio activity, and in recent years, I've come to understand that certain levels of extreme carnal acts can reduce one's prana state when they're in bed with the wrong person. And so my idea is, especially here on the land and being somewhat abstinent, I'm not like out there seeking basically partners at this time. It doesn't mean that I don't have desire. It means that what you have to go through and the prostitution of one's morals and ethics, right? So like somebody can't show me right now people that are into sex that are also anti-war and into me and into some of my spiritual ideas. You can find people that are pro-Trump, anti-Trump, they're in their political boxes, and they're fornicating and they're loving on people that think just like them. But the greater reality is people like me now live alone because of the depth of where we're taking our content, and we don't give the opposite sex the same level of, type of like googly eyes that I have gravitated and given positive energy, and felt even hypnotized by the beauty of some women. The point where I thought that they were angels, and later saw them their demonic side or reptilian side. And if I actually go through the tape of every actual experience that I've had, it's like something out of a horror film. No pun intended. That it's not very flattering. So, hey, when I think back to the 1980s, and I even see, and it's not like those women in the 80s were angels. It's like some were just figuring out, this is before cell phones, how to work it. But it was an early stage of it before social media took over and really allowed us to use each other in profound ways. We get back on them for thousands of years of misogyny. Get back on the man. And we're in that age of getting back, but that isn't heal the divide between the masculine and feminine. So we're in this type of revenge sexuality or gender warfare era that defines where we're at, right? Um, I remember just reaching for a drink and a woman, accusing me of doing the man spreading thing. In an era of time where there was tons of propaganda saying Muslim invasion, Muslim man invasion, where are the women? Muslim man invasion, right? I'm not feeling too keen on somebody just snapping at me when I'm returning to Portland. And at that point, like, I wasn't really aware the fake Sharia law invasion meme was really just beginning. But now that it's 2019, I can see how elements of anti-themism in this most post 9/11 world has dramatically negatively affected my romantic life. To the point where I think that most women are probably heavily infected by the accusations that they're committing white genocide if they dare be with someone other than what is deemed to be acceptable. But the greater reality is what's deemed acceptable is not just white, but it may be black in some cases if we watch the cues from the mainstream media. So what's really happening is not a period in which the mainstream media is promoting true diversity in a wholesale sense. It's playing games with people. We go back to the 1980s, a person like me probably could have been in those movies. I think back at how 80s women would have responded to me, and I see a sea of women in interest. Seriously. I think of 1980s women. If I was born in 1960 with this face and this body and my genetics and my athletic aptitude, because I've never really had like martial arts buddies that were into sparring, but back in the day, men were more into things like that. So maybe back, in the 80s or 90s, I could have had my own martial arts club. Maybe could have learned dancing. I'm not exactly opposed to that. Like, where has my society shown me the beautiful art of dancing with a woman, ballroom style? That's like previous generations. Also, cooking, I have never known, and this includes family. I'm like, I mean, I barely remember my mother cooking anything. There was something about nor cutting my hair. There's something about the current generation of women, and I'm not saying that that's their role, but like if we as men are expected to have certain skills, right, to be able to work on certain things, and I didn't grow up in an environment, so I acknowledge that as a male, that I didn't grow up knowing how to work on a Honda or Toyota. And I grew up in an era of technology and also moving around to where that was not in an urban area where you're going to learn from just people around you that aren't even a part of your tribe, that you don't even know. And I've lived most of my life completely alone without family. So the basic constructs in this modern world were not there for me as a man to learn basic building things. And as a man living in this area, I have asked people to be a mentor or to teach me. But I'm considered too crazy because of the way that I express myself in these videos to be seen as something other than a untouchable, like a lower Indian, East Indian caste system. That's how I live here. It's okay. That's how I live here. That's how I live here. And I live in a day and age to where society does not want to hear that some of us are speaking on YouTube, trying to help people out by showing them outside the box ways of viewing that reality. And as a result of that and other factors that we cannot control, like the elements of our birth and our genetics, we have found ourselves alone.
And that is the truth. If I was born in this actual form in 1960, or better yet, in 1970, to where I would have been, what, 18 in 1988? Well, I would have been in a lot more fights. If it was Portland, a lot more encounters with actual skinheads, but I would have had a better time. I also could have got involved in maybe a little bit more trouble. So I don't think that things are by accident. There's always been a part of me, and maybe some of you, that may have resented our parents, when and where we were born, including our bodies and genetics. Birth guilt, or birth disdain, certainly birth trauma. And now let's talk about that, though. If we look at the traumas, then, that we have been enduring at an incremental rate since, what year did I specify? 87. I mean, seriously, after 87, then really after 89, it started snowballing downward. And I could see in my own life, 1993, like my own, life path and years, and being at a certain age, like 33 in 2013, right after 2012, but during the solar maximum, seems to be like by design, not an accident that I was 5 in 1985, and I can remember that. But back to that memory of my mother, a positive one, holding her hand at the library in Seattle and looking through old records and hearing that song, Nothing's Gonna Stop Us. Nothing's gonna stop us now. Not in a karaoke mood. Nothing's gonna stop us. Nothing's gonna stop us now. Starship Jefferson or something to that effect. And there was a sense of, and it was like, I feel like I'm Hunter S. Thompson describing that moment where the line hits the, but to have a childhood with a parent that I had a lot of conflict with, there were only so many memories in which it seemed that the stars were in our favor, mother and son, son and mother. And that was one of those moments. Living at Arthur's house in Seattle, in downtown, and nothing going to stop us now. And there was a lot of pain that my mother had gone through. Her and my father, parted ways when I was born. And there was a lot of trauma left over from that and other things. 1993, for me, fast forwarding from that moment when I was 5 in 85 to when I'm 13 in 93, and my grandparents are divorcing, and it's the death of the farm story. So the 1980s for me, and looking back at all that, that's going back to the farm. That's the pre-Exodus era. That's the pre-death of my grandparents. That's before all this crazy stuff. That's before 9/11. Now, for me, being that my father was born in the Middle East and my mother is an Oregonian, and when I talk about the specifics of that, I'm alienated from my own species because of what most people believe about that day, and then, of course, this marginalization and association. And nobody cares what I've been through. Now I can say that with full assuredness, without some sort of reservation, that in fact, no, there's actually tons of audience members that care what I've been through. I truly think, no offense intended, but if it walks like a duck, that you want to be entertained, that you like your inspiration, you want your cake and you want to eat it too. But the stuff that has to do with my early life trauma, it's interesting that there would be no resolution, there would be no healing, there would be no outlet between myself and any real nurturing level female. We would live in a world where you either pay for your sex, prostitution, or you have a lot of money to attract a mate, or with health insurance, however you get it, that someone gets therapy and literally has to pay money through whatever means for someone just to talk to them. No, it's like the world's already ended. And we're just waiting from the announcement from your USA Today. No, the world's fucked. What we're waiting for is the return of the nurturing divine masculine and feminine within the human species. Where are the real indigo and crystal children? Also, there does seem to be a focus on those type of children being born around the periods of that. And I would say that for there to be a high, there has to be a low, right? For there to be darkness, there has to be light, to understand this polarity. So I do believe that there can be the existence of a certain amount of children that are born with extraordinary abilities for a generation. Then there could be a generation that passes them to where the children that are born are basically zombies. They're children of the corn. They're not tapped in.
They can easily be duped into putting people into gas chambers. They can simply be born during a certain era of time where they're told their whole life, these people from the other side of the wall did this to you. And so right now, what we're seeing with the dark side of the alt-right millennials, some of these people are going to be doing some pretty dark stuff in a couple of years. Some people already are. We have yet to see things really rise to where they will be. And a lot of things will kick off after 2020. Now they're saying there's going to be arrest of our current president, and people are memeing about civil war and mass arrests and vigilante squads. And if you study the behavior in Portland, Oregon, that's another reason. None of these things were happening with Joey Gibson and the others in Portland, Oregon when I was living there. I said an event was coming, and I still think there could be a false flag blamed on Muslims to bring forth the campaign for internment. And that internment campaign, which many people will support, will be there to demonize all Americans, but it will result in non-Muslims, American-born, being interrogated, interned, detained as well, possibly. So this is what has me concerned. The 1980s was a generation of gangsters, wise guys, tradesmen, grocery workers, truck drivers, people that were literally inheriting the fruits and the meat of the previous decades that followed World War II. It was the buildup. And so we did the anabolic steroids type of analogy. We have Wall Street. And I think even the 1980s had their own type of recession, not depression, but recession from elements of fraud that were going on in Wall Street. And so like the world of the bubble. And so if I was an economist, I can give you like deeper analysis into that, but I can really only speak in a broad sense. There was a big time bubble reality that people were beginning to live off of. Credit is another. We also went from the day and age of the local mom and pop loan shark and collector, for better or for worse, and they were basically replaced by the banks. They're basically replaced by the banks. You know, there'd be a lot of stories that were told to me by someone about the way loan sharking and collecting was done in Portland's old neighborhoods in the 1970s and how dangerous it was. Something like Sin City, somebody that ran with a guy that could be described compared to Marv from Sin City, which has also been put into a movie. And then the greater reality is, some people forget that, but some people don't. And while they don't know why, and they don't think it through as deep as I do, I pick up on a period in which people were just simply a little bit smarter, stronger, sexier, and they were coming out of a high of a lot of resources, and they were doing stuff with it. And for the very first time, we were being exposed to action films, pop culture, anabolic steroids, new types of foods, new types of entertainment, the discotheque. Must I say any more? I think my birth seems to have originated out of the 1979 discotheque era. And, you know, it is like a little bit of that magic, as Oliver Newton, John Newton, sings on her song from the 1980s. It's magic, nothing can stand in our way. Dun, 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 dun. Have to believe we are magic. And, you know, I'm not the best karaoke specialist, but I remember sitting, listening to that nearly in tears on my Walkman and or laptop, thinking about an awesome screenplay about Portland's old world if I was given the information. If someone was to give me that information. And I think that that would be awesome to present that to a modern city with its own interests in the vintage and things of that nature. I also want to do a shout out to Son of Hightower again, and I want to thank him for giving me verbal permission to use his videos. If there are other people out there that are watching this that would allow me to use their videos, if you're in Portland or somewhere else, let me know, because I want to watch my P's and Q's, but I want to get more creative with music. That includes getting more royalty-free music, as well as footage, and expressing myself in a deeper manner. I feel like we are in some sort of a shift. On an individual level, I can speak to that. There are elements of the collective shift which are not so good, which the New Agers never warned you about. I have way more credibility than the New Agers that promised you a fake ascension, either in 2000 or 2012. But because of tribalism and the illusions of separation, they come in the form of a beautiful hot chick. Let's get real. Blonde, redhead, whatever. Sexy bodies. Sometimes they're male. Not calling men sexy, but they can certainly be viewed as super sexy in a William Henry, James Gillan kind of way to the women of this culture. And they can lie to them, just like Christopher Green. And there's something about our biology, right? You need to get away from the defensiveness regarding racism and understand the biological blueprint, genetic disposition coming from those entities that created us to be warlike as well as supersexual, but to be supersexual with certain types of humans and to be certain warlike with other types of humans. Now we're in the day and age where social media has been weaponized. And so we go back and we again give 100th reason why there is a subconscious, deep-seated interest in all things 80s. It was, I'm gonna conclude with this. It was humanity's first real, if you go for 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s, music entertainment, first time they're being exposed to multimedia. It's making them feel real good. It's altering their perceptions. People are watching TV news. Again, go from the 50s, 60s, just to step up and the role that pop culture has played in building up the population, but also creating strife between the peoples. We have that. We can see even their influence over gangster rap, must I say more. And so now we have social media, which started out as something that would be like anti-establishment. Yeah, we're going to be like woke and stuff. And it's actually been weaponized to suppress the real truth while they're brainwashing our peers. People want to go back, take me back. Do, 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 do. People want to go back to an era of time to their innocence. And there's something about energetically time traveling back to maybe get parts of this is where we're going to close. Something may have happened to you that was traumatic. I think that maybe I have talked about alien abductions. And I think that there are waves that took place in the 70s and then it dropped off for a little bit. There was a little bit of air that was allowed. And there was things that came back later in the 90s. I think that the UFO sightings, the map of UFO sightings throughout the United States, although my audience didn't agree, people are laughing at me. But if you look at the period of more sunspots, you see more report of UFO activity. So I'm speaking to you in idiocracy reality where people don't get this type of causal reality. Connections between the sun, portals opening up, more UFO sightings, more alien abductions, more manipulations of the human genotype. So some of us came into this world and we were exposed to some of that. I believe I was exposed to things that I cannot recall. I told you I didn't like some of those extracurricular curricular activity, childhood rides to these gatherings in Washington. And I felt that my mother put me up on a radar unconsciously. It wasn't her fault, right? But we shouldn't be covering up the truth. And we can talk about the truth about what happened to us without cursing our parents. But we shouldn't be hiding the truth about what happened. Oh, yeah, she put me on a radar. And she was hanging with the wrong crowd in the sense that they were looking towards other forms of life to rapture them. And there was a sense of denial as I was an adult remembering this, that ever happened. But that type of belief system was predominant. And as I discovered the archons, I look at that group, those groups that in some ways seem to have a fair amount of empathy for those that are called the Greys. Now, when you start seeing that type of rhetoric and compassion for parasitic entities, oh, just send them love. How about let's just get rid of their influence over our lives? You see, but I've gotten into that in past videos where I've exposed the fake spirituality of the modern New Age movement. But I saw how that adversely potentially affected my life and the household. And I can say that without attacking my mother. But the truth is still the truth, whether people want to admit what happened or not. hearing from other people in the 80s and also see the inundation of alien movies like E.T., others, as well as Flight of the Navigator, there clearly seems to be some element within pop culture that absolutely was playing the predictive programming of the benevolent aliens. The benevolent aliens during a period in which women were having memories of sexual assault from grays, and so the government created the False Memory Act in the late 1970s. And so I'm going to say this again. There was something about 85 to 87. There may have been a wave of energy that did result in things shifting. It didn't mean that the world was saved. It mean we went from one reality to another. And when we go in between the realities, there could potentially be an opening up of love on the planet. Really good music, really good Miami Vice fashions. And so I'm going to leave it there. That may really be why there's such a big interest in, say, 1985. Like, literally, this is what inspired this video. I looked for new synthwave, which I try to listen to more so than love songs and anything with lyrics. It's great exercise music, as well as meditation music, as well as contemplation music, just sitting in my chair and going, seeing the movie This Reality, my ultimate documentary, manifesting before your very eyes. If only I can just kind of make it by thought. But that's what it is. It's that sense of tapping into power. It's that sense of lifting heavy weights. And that includes the heavy weight of trauma over our shoulders. I'm going to end it there and encourage you to check out the links down below. Please become a Patreon. Okay, we haven't had anyone join Patreon in probably a month or two. Last person that joined with $1. So I put a lot of work into these videos, but the level of support that I need isn't there. And I would strongly encourage some additional support. Thank you so much.